some elements of the debate in the Senate, I heard a senator questioning whether the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service had all the resources that it needed in order to effectively carry out its function as the premier law enforcement agency in Trinidad and Tobago. And he opined that they must get all the resources that they need. In this regard, I have asked the Commissioner of Police, Mr. MacDonald Jacobs, to join me here this morning to address a couple very critical issues as far as we are concerned. This week, the Cabinet authorized the re-entry into the Parliament of two pieces of legislation: the Private Security Bill, which had lapsed before, having been presented to the House having sent it to a Joint Select Committee. We spent months in the Joint Select Committee, comprising of the government, the opposition, independent senators with technocrats and drafters to support us. We spent months in there, and once we were finished, it was our duty to bring this reworked piece of legislation back to the larger Parliament for discussions on the report of the Joint Select Committee, which is of course accompanied by the refined bill. And I presented that to the House, and once I did that, it was quite clear from the responses of members of the opposition that they were not going to support it after all of that time, after all of that work together on these matters in the Joint Select Committee. So we had to, as we have had to do on many occasions, go back to the drawing board and rearrange this legislation, watering it down effectively from what was desired, with a higher level of protection to the society, removing the need for their support because they signal clearly. In fact, they have on occasion said they are not supporting any legislation that we bring that requires a special majority. They are as irresponsible as that. So we know that in advance. So the Cabinet authorized this week that this private security bill, which is intended to regulate the private security industry with about 50,000 participants on estimation in Trinidad and Tobago, to ensure that they are better trained, better organized, better equipped, better dealt with in terms of industrial relations issues, so that that private security establishment could link with the state security apparatus, as happens in many countries of the world, so we have a broader platform. Because private security does provide support in terms of security, and the state ultimately benefits from it. So the Cabinet agreed that we could represent this private security bill, but with the opposition in mind, take out the need for their support, that is to say, what is now called a supermajority, as opposed to a simple majority. The Cabinet as well authorized that we take to Parliament another important piece of legislation, the Bail Amendment Bill, which will extend the life of the law as it now exists. We passed the Bail Amendment Act number 17 of 2019. And the Commissioner is here to indicate to us how that, as a resource, supported the work of the police in the protection of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But this is a restriction on bail touching and concerning sections 4 and 5 of the Constitution, and therefore in that particular case, in order to restrict the bail, you will need the support of the opposition, because that requires a supermajority. So these two pieces of legislation, very important in the fight and the response to the criminals and criminality in the protection of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Whether it is improving the capacity in terms of security, or restricting the bail and the behavior and the conduct of the criminals who the commissioner will demonstrate have no compunction, no issue with repeating their behavior over and over again. That law, Act number 17 of 2019, expires. It was passed and assented to. It was assented to on the 5th of August 2019. It therefore expires because there was a 3-year sunset clause, and it expires on the 4th of August 2022. And we now, Cabinet has approved that we take it back to the Parliament to have it extended, but we know in advance, since it requires the support of the opposition, it's doubtful whether they would support it. Insofar as resources are concerned, the Commissioner would have announced recently that the police service would have acquired new vehicles within recent times. Cabinet approved the acquisition of 80 vehicles, and these have been made and are being made available to the police. I am not hearing too much about not having vehicles. We should not be hearing that when people go for protection and for support from the police anywhere in Trinidad and Tobago. Body cams, body cameras, to aid in transparency and to support the police evidence and to resolve any disputes as to facts that may arise. 1,160 of them are now being distributed across the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, particularly to the frontline officers who are out there. I'm aware that the police service has the benefit of aerial support, including the use of drones, which they have and use in preventing crime and protecting the people and detecting crime and protecting the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm in a position to confidently and truthfully say that over the past year, we paid particular attention to the science insofar as DNA, our data bank, our forensic science center, the police's capacity using the science to solve crime. And I am seeing, and I have heard the Commissioner say publicly up to recently, he is seeing this improvement. It is tangible, it is real, because we have improved administratively and in terms of techniques and in terms of training and in terms of the number of people operating in this platform, and we are definitely seeing an improvement and in fact solving more crimes as a result of that. The recent murder of a couple in Tobago, what year was that, with John Mills? 2019. In 2019, a couple was murdered in Tobago. The criminals took their bank card, might have gotten the PIN numbers before they perished, went to the bank, withdrew money, lots of stuff. The police, I'm advised, was able to arrest someone at that time, but because of insufficiency of evidence, had to release the man. But in the meantime, with the improvement in our science techniques, as I've just explained, which transpired over the last year and is ongoing, they were able to pick up the very gentleman now with sound scientific connections to the crime. And within the last week or two, 2 persons were charged for those murders. Very recently, the Cabinet agreed to allow the Commissioner of Police, and I went to the Cabinet and advanced this, to allow the Commissioner of Police to bring 60 officers who were on leave, either pre-retirement leave or their own and entitled vacation leave. But the commissioner, as part of his strategy, wanted to improve police management and control of the roads, understanding that the criminals do have to use the roads to go from one point to the next for the most part, and would carry their tools of their trade, their ugly trade, with them. So the commissioner, as part of his strategy, established a special patrol team, properly trained, and they're not going to be making the ordinary traffic stop. They are capable of dealing with any situation that they encounter. And in order to man that, he felt he needed some extra legs and some extra hands and some extra capacity. So he came to this minister, I went to the cabinet, and the cabinet allowed the commissioner to bring these people out, to buy out their leave, as it were, so that they could come and man this operation as a strategy to dealing with crime. Burgeoning crime, traumatic crime, which we all experience in Trinidad and Tobago. The police service has its own intelligence gathering capacity. Intelligence gathering is critical in preventing and detecting crime. It has its own internal capacity, but yet it has the support of the Strategic Service Agency, which is a national parliament, supported by an act of parliament, statutory organization, which collects information. That's all it does. And it shares that information with law enforcement and others, including the police. The police service has been for many years in this country and continues as we speak to get support, real support, from the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force. The police service benefits, like all other arms of national security and law enforcement generally, from constant training and retraining and upskilling at home, regionally, and abroad. So I say all of this, ladies and gentlemen, to say, in response to the senator who I listened to yesterday, the police service is getting the resources that this country can afford and that it calls for. And I've only given you a very skimpy synopsis of some of the support the police service gets so that it could carry out its obligation and its mandate to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But bail restrictions, from all that I have heard from the police, being able to contain those who are not afraid to perpetrate more and more and more heinous crimes, is another important resource that it needs. And it is on this basis that the cabinet has asked and approved that we bring back and seek to extend the life of Act number 17 of 2019. And before I give way to Mr. Jacob, let me just say very briefly what some of that is. In that act, the first schedule, part 2, identifies certain offenses. Trafficking in narcotics, largely under the Dangerous Drugs Act. Possession of firearms and ammunition under the Firearms Act. Possession of imitation firearms, also right there in the Firearms Act. Rape and sexual offenses. Sexual intercourse with a child. Offenses under the Anti-Gang Law. Offenses under the Offenses Against the Person Act, including murder, of course. The offense of kidnapping. Offenses in the Anti-Terrorism Law. And any attempt to do any of those that I have listed. So in the first schedule, Part 2 of this Act the first schedule and Part 2 has these offenses. And Act number 17 of 2019 deals with an amendment to the Bail Act in relation to these offenses. And offenses where the sentences are going to be 10 years and more. So it's pretty serious offenses. So it's not obscene language and any small thing. These restrictions to bail require the offense that we are tending to, where bail will be restricted, to be able to yield a jail term of more than 10 years. And I've listed the very serious level of offenses that we are talking about. And essentially it says, I'll give you a little synopsis of it without going into too much details. Where a person has already a conviction for one of the offenses, as I described a while ago, and is now charged with another one of those offenses, meaning conviction and charge, his bail should be restricted under this law. Where a person has a firearm charge or more pending, and now finds himself charged for another firearm offense, the Act number 17 of 2019 allows his bail to be restricted. Where a person has a charge, not a conviction, a charge for one of the offenses I've just outlined, and now comes up with another charge, a repeat offender, so to speak, his bail should be restricted. And where a person has a charge for one of the offenses I listed a while ago, and is now found, the police is now able to tell the court that he used a firearm in the commission of another offense of similar ilk, his bail could be restricted as well. And the restriction is really that he is not allowed to apply for bail if his matter is not up and running. In other words, if evidence is not taken within 120 days. So if after 120 days no evidence is taken, he can now apply for bail. That basically is what this is all about. Restrictions to bails for very serious offenses with high potential, 10 years or more in jail, and in the context of that which I have explained. Those restrictions affect Section 4 and 5 of the Constitution, the fundamentally enshrined rights. And this law had to be passed with a special or supermajority. When the Attorney General went to the Parliament to request it in 2019, in all of the negotiations and deliberations and resistance on the part of the opposition, who, by the way, supported it in the Senate. It was passed in the Senate, but they took objection to it when it came to the House of Representatives, showing the duplicitous nature of these persons. We had gone to Parliament asking for 5 years. At the end of the day, we were only allowed 3 years, and as I said, this expires on the 4th of August, and we will now be going to Parliament again to have these provisions extended and continued in order to provide the police with that extra tool, legislative tool, while it grapples with all of the other issues around law enforcement and crime prevention in Trinidad and Tobago. I would like now to give way to Mr. Jacob, who will tell you how this has assisted the police and why he has reported to me as minister, which is what we took to the cabinet as reasons why this law should continue as a resource, as a tool in dealing with crime management in Trinidad and Tobago. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Minister, and good morning to the viewing public. You know, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is truly looking forward for this act to continue, this bail act. We are looking to ensure that we can get the support so we can continue using it as an effective tool in our crime fighting drive. The bail act in itself, we recognize another twist to it, and I need to put that forward here this morning. We, in a cursory review this morning, out of 150 charges within the last year or so, notice that 50 of the matters that were completed, in most instances, persons pleaded guilty. Why did they plead guilty? They pleaded guilty because if the matter did not, if they choose for the matter not to be completed, they were facing what exists within the Bail Act. But they also recognized that some of the fines and sentencing were very low. So they opted to plead guilty. When we look at it, we recognize, in looking at firearm offenses, that there was an average fines of $8,000 and $9,000. And only out of the 15, the 11 cases, persons got imprisonment, sentences of imprisonment. So we are seeing, what we are seeing is that the persons who are charged and are affected by the Bail Act are more inclined now to plead guilty. But not because of the Bail Act only. It is providing that strength. But because the police service, with our recent approach of having our one-stop shop, where we process the whole aspects of firearms in a swift manner, and we now have the reports and all the necessary documentation and having our file prepared to go on, and we are ready to go on. With that coming out of the police service, we find that persons now are more inclined to plead guilty. Without the Bail Act existing, we will get a reverse of what we are seeing happening. It is putting us in a good position whereby when these persons plead guilty and are convicted, on the other occasion, we know how the Bail Act is now structured. Without it, we will not get that effect. We have a lot of repeat offenders and a lot of recidivism taking place. And in some instances, some of the persons who are involved in the criminal activities are repeat offenders. Persons who go in, make jail, they come out, they get bail, and we have a continuation of it. We had some situations in the Central Division recently where some persons who we knew was responsible for committing more than 10 murders. However, as we build the whole aspect of our evidence, yes, the person is now deceased, but when you look at the sort of damage that was done to the society because that individual got bail, and we have numerous other examples. So we are saying that it is necessary that we get the necessary support so that this bill can continue and the police officers could have the tool to assist us. It gave our investigators a certain amount of room to carry out their investigation. So again, I'm making the plea, and I'm also making the plea to the persons, our magistrates and others, in looking at how things can be proportionate to the particular offense. In fact, a simple revolver or a pistol is cost between $12,000 and $15,000 out there. An AR-15 is $45,000. So what's the cost of a firearm? And when someone is held with a firearm, the average fine is $8,000 to $9,000. That is the average fine. And out of the 11 persons who were in prison, they got between 2 to 4 years. So we are saying that we're looking for proportionality. And when we look at the sort of injuries and death as a result of the use of firearms in Trinidad and Tobago, in fact, 85% of our murders is as a result of the use of firearms. We want them to look at what is happening and let it be proportionate. So, in one breath, they are encouraged to plead guilty because the police now are ready to go on. Number two, you have the Bail Act that is preventing them from getting bail immediate. They have to stay inside at least 120 days. They don't want to stay inside. So what they will do, they will plead guilty because it is so easy for them to pay $8,000 or $9,000 in the court because they have the wherewithal to buy firearms that worth over $20,000. So I want to make that plea. And I also want, Minister, I want to again thank you for the effort being made in supplying us with the vehicles. In fact, we have 15 vehicles to distribute today to the various divisions, and that will make it 67 vehicles we have received out of the 80 vehicles. And in addition to that, the issue that we had with our motorcyclists, even though they have completed the training, and 41 persons, and we would have been only able to put basically 21 additional motorbikes out there, the parts that we required for the other motorcycles came in yesterday. So therefore, within the next week or so, we'll be able to have the 41 motorcyclists out there on the roadway. And as I mentioned to the public, that will not just be on the highway and on the bus route, but they will be patrolling within the communities. Also, recently, just within the last month or so, we were able to acquire 300 bulletproof vests for our officers and 300 batons, extended batons. Again, we are thankful for that. So gradually we are getting the tools that are required. And I heard you mentioned, Minister, in relation to our body cameras. And at this time we have completed the training of 570 officers with the body cams. I mentioned to the public that we have a little slung with the challenge with ensuring that our IT apparatus is in place. So it slowed down things a bit, but we are getting there to ensure that all our frontline officers are fitted with the body-worn cameras. So again, thank you very much for the support as we go along. And what is the key? That approval of the 60 officers with an indirect buyout of the leave to come forward to help us with our patrol initiative is also very, very thankful. Therefore, we can now further accelerate in our firearm initiative that we have launched, where we already seized 320 firearms for the year so far, with 45 high-powered weapons. So with that bridge that is provided with these 60 officers coming out, we can now take other officers to concentrate on dealing with that firearm initiative that we are doing jointly with the Defense Force and the other agencies. So as we go forward, I wish to emphasize the importance of the continuation of the Bail Act, that it provides us with a lot of support and as a significant tool in our arsenal in the fight against crime. So again, thank you very much.
Let me say this. I understand the Commissioner of Police to have said a number of very important things. One of the things I gather is, of course, that in this fight to manage the crime situation in this or any country, I'm dealing with Trinidad and Tobago, a balance has to be struck. We have a constitution, we have laws. We have a constitution and we have laws, and the law enforcement, police, defense force, every one of us must abide by the constitutional principles and tenets and the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. But those who are outlaws, they have no such constraints. A certain gang leader, reputed, was shot at a couple of years ago in this country. And I understand from the intelligence we gathered, they formed the view, he lived, but they formed the view, the gang that is, that it was a particular young lady living in their community who had put him in place, if I may use that colloquial construct. That happened a Saturday afternoon around 2:30 p.m., the shooting incident. Sunday morning, they went to the young lady's home. Persons went to the young lady's home and called her out around 8 a.m. And as she appeared on the front step by the door, she was gunned down. No arrest, no application for bail, no preliminary inquiry, no trial before judge and jury, no appeal to the Court of Appeal and then to the Privy Council, nothing. They behave like that. Outlaws behave like that. But we, law-abiding, law-making, law enforcement, citizens, we abide by, and we must and we should, by the tenets of the Constitution and the law. But a balance has to be struck. When the Attorney General piloted this bill in 2019, actually piloted it on the 11th of June of that year. Here one of the things that he said, and I'm quoting from Hansard Al-Rawi, Honourable Faris Al-Rawi. In the Bail Act, one will, that's the existing law, the 1994 law that was first manifestation of a Bail Act in Trinidad and Tobago. In the Bail Act, one will definitely notice that there is no bail provided for murder, treason, piracy or hijacking, any offense for which death is the penalty fixed by law. Hear him, no bail at all. That was saved, that was never challenged, but that was in 2019. Since then, ladies and gentlemen, in the case of Achille Charles, the Court of Appeal of Trinidad and Tobago found that in the context of Section 13 of the Constitution of this country, which we all abide by and must, and for good reason, notwithstanding that a bill is passed by a super or special majority, under Section 13 of the Constitution, which talks about a democratic society with respect for the law and the rights of the individual, if I would paraphrase it, the court is able to strike down legislation as unconstitutional. In the Achille Charles matter, the Court of Appeal, led by the Chief Justice, found on those legal principles that you could grant bail for murder, and persons have been granted bail since then in Trinidad and Tobago for murder. So when the Attorney General spoke, that was a no-no. It has changed. When the Attorney General piloted this bail bill, he spoke of the numbers of firearms at that time. Well, that too has changed, because today in Trinidad and Tobago, the Strategic Services Agency, or the SSA, in a recent study of this platform told us that there are estimated about 12,000 illegal firearms in Trinidad and Tobago. And some of us, watching on at what is happening anecdotally, might conclude that there might be a whole lot more. So the platform has gotten worse in terms of the prevalence of firearms, the behavior. Two young women told me last week when I was questioning the behavior of a young man in their community, told me, Mr. Hinds, these fellas and them, these people now, you see them all, they're taking pills. No, I didn't ask her what pill she talking about, but I know it's not Sanatogen. Because I know from information available to me, we have ecstasy pills around the place here. And we have strange drugs like ketamine, things that we were not familiar with at this time. And when sometimes these perpetrators of crime take the drugs, they believe they are invincible, they believe that they are impenetrable, and they walk into any situation, anything, because they are under the influence of strange drugs. I'm only saying these things to let you know a lot has changed in front of our eyes in this society, and we must continue to operate within the confines of the Constitution and the law. But there are those who are not afraid. The Commissioner just told us of intelligence which suggests some of them might have been responsible for 10 and 12 lives. Take a little job to do this and to do that. I know as Minister of National Security, there are those who are inside of the prison walls, who are bursting at the seams on an hour-by-hour basis, want to come out to be in your midst, although it's criminality, including murder, that put them in there when they couldn't get bail for murder, but they're making applications now. So the platform has changed and a balance has to be struck. The Achille Childs judgment, where our Court of Appeal said they could be given bail for murder, is now an appeal to our highest court, the Privy Council. And we don't know what the outcome of that would be, whether they would uphold the finding of the local Court of Appeal or whether they will find against it. So the balance has to be struck. And in finding this balance, Mr. Jacob told us here today that Act number 17 of 2019 has proven to be very valuable in managing the platform in the protection of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We, as a government, accept that. And we have, at the level of the cabinet, agreed that we should come to the Parliament and ask the Parliament, where a special vote is needed, for its support. We know every single one of us on the government side will support this, because we know the trauma, the pain, the mayhem, the rape, the bloodshed, the trafficking, the selling pills and poison to your children that you have to contend with. And our job, regardless of what the fools would say about who not interested in safety and security, that's my job. That's what I do. That's all this is about. From the time I came here at 8 o'clock this morning until I leave, and when I leave, that's it. It's always my job to look after the safety, the security, and the well-being of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But I don't investigate no crime. I don't run down no criminal. My job is to provide clear policy directions, policy coming from the government, which the government garners from the demands and the expectations of you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And it is to communicate that policy or policies those policies very precisely and clearly to the police service and all the other arms of national security. My job includes providing with the resources, and I'm very pleased to hear Mr. Jacob acknowledging that even in these difficult financial circumstances, we are providing the resources as they call for it. Including the legislative support or resource. As parliamentarians, we owe that to them in finding this balance. So I'm very pleased. And I can tell you a whole lot of stuff administratively, strategically, legally, and in terms of tangible resources are being done, are being put in place to ensure that the police service is not stymied, its hands is not tied behind its back. And I too would like to join Mr. Jacob when police officers tell me that they spend a year, 9 months, paying attention to a suspect, fighting up from an intelligence perspective to get information, where he does hide the gun, who does keep it for him. All of these things, hours and hours, man hours of work and effort, gas, resources, and then finally they get the man and the gun, and then they go to court, and the magistrate, $2,500. The fellow pleads guilty, as you hear Mr. Jacobs say. He pays the fine, sometimes $3,000. And he goes and he gets himself another one. And he comes back in your face again. He kills, he does all of that. I mean, these are matters for the court, but I would like, as Minister of National Security, as I call on all of the citizens of this country, including the judiciary, independent as it is, to bear in mind that all arms of the state must continue to collaborate. And this is why I'm here too. The Parliament, the Executive, and the Judiciary, we must all collaborate. We recognize at National Security that we have some responsibility for quickening the criminal justice process. Because part of the reason why bail is granted is when no evidence is taken in the matter within 120 days. So the slowness of the criminal justice system causes the court to be more inclined to want to give bail. So we recognize at National Security that the police, the Forensic Science Center, and other elements of it have some responsibility in terms of quickening the criminal justice system. And that's one of the reasons why we focused on the last year since I came here so specifically on the Forensic Science Center. Don't want to see no bodies pile up there and no thing taking long before Mr. Jacob could get it. And no machine breakdown and out of service for 6-7 months. No. Up and ready. We've trained about 25 more police officers, isn't it? 21 or 25? 21. Ballistic training. So now, in addition to the staff complement at the Forensic Science Center, we have investigators, police officers who have acquired that science. And now they work. The police has its own forensic capacity as well. All of these things, our contribution in national security to quickening the pace of the criminal justice system, because we understand its implications for you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So I am hoping that you would have understood, ladies and gentlemen, the balance that has to be struck, the difficulty in dealing and managing with the crime situation, having to follow scrupulously all of the tenets of the law and the Constitution, and the advantage that the criminals have, the advantage of surprise, to pounce on us when they think it's opportune to operate under law, and as well, they have no limits to what they would do because they are motivated by money. And by the way, when I talk about criminals, I'm not only talking about red blood criminals and violent criminals and gangsters, as you tend to see them. I'm talking about all criminals, including the very sophisticated white-collar operators who steal at the drop of a hat taxpayers' money when they could. And I have information coming to me, but I can't be as reckless as the opposition. The other day, one of them find some document and come making things, not understanding the difference between intelligence and evidence. I cannot do that. But I too get a lot of intelligence, frightening intelligence, that the police now must pursue to convert to information, evidence. That's the job of the police, to convert information and intelligence to justiciable, court-worthy evidence. That's the job. And that's what we will continue to provide resources for them to do. And this Act number 17 of 2019, a restriction to the bail law, is one aspect of the resources that the police need. And I hope that we'll get the support of all those who are relevant in this process in the Parliament, because the government has already accepted that this is a worthwhile resource for the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in the protection of you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you very much, and I am now available to you for any question or questions that you may have in this regard. I thank you.
Morning, Terry Ann Brown Campbell from TTT News.
My lady.
I'm just curious to find out what was the cost to pay off the leave of these 60 officers.
I think it's just about $3 million, just over $3 million. I don't have the exact figure, but yes, we are buying out their leave. they are ones,
for 4 months.
Yeah, who are willing to come out to do this particular response to the program as other officers, because the COVID-19, one of the things we took into account, the COVID experience affected the police service as everyone else in a very severe way. Many of the officers had to be quarantined, some more times than once, and altogether there was serious challenge. And then in the burgeoning crime environment we have, Mr. Jacob is now, by way of his strategy, putting new units in place, trying to organize different things, strengthen existing units. So there was a real crunch and a pressure on the manpower, especially, and I will say candidly, I hope no one takes offense, in Trinidad and Tobago, where our productivity levels, including the police service, is not what it ought to be. So for all of those reasons, it became necessary. The proposal was made to me. I quite proudly and happily and promptly took it to the cabinet, and I think it's just over $3 million. Your next question or questions, please.
Good morning, Minister. Good morning, Acting Commissioner. Darren Bahol from the Newsday. Minister, first of all, you have been a very experienced criminal defense attorney in your previous incarnation.
I thank you for your observation and compliment. I hope you're right.
You, as an attorney, would be aware that the judiciary, the police service, the office of the DPP are all independent institutions in this country. Yes?
Of course.
And when you speak about a collaborative approach, is it that they should all be singing from the same hymn sheet?
I never suggested that, but I'll tell you what, I'm also a student of constitutional law, which I did at postgraduate level at the University of London, where I studied. And I can tell you from my observation of constitutional law, while there is conceptually, in theory, academically, and sensibly the need for separation of powers and clear lines between the Parliament and the executive and the judiciary and the office of the DPP and the police service, which is part of the executive under the purview of the Minister of National Security, but operationally it is for the Commissioner of Police. So there's even a distinction inside of the Ministry of National Security in that regard. While all that be so, the human reality is, even in England, there has been And there must be collaboration between the three arms of the state for it to work. I have friends who are judges, some who I practice with. We may have a drink of water or non-alcoholic beverage together, but my integrity tells me I must never. We could talk about cricket, we could talk about the weather, we could talk about aspects of Trinidad and Tobago, but I am not to tell him, look, you have a case coming up next week and I want you to decide it this way or that. If I did that, he should call the next police officer he sees and take the action that he should take. That's the point I'm making. When we have the opening of Parliament, the judges come, the reality is, even in England, there was a time when the Lord Chancellor, as that office was, he was the head of the judiciary, but he also had a seat in the Parliament. So the reality is that there has to be collaboration and cooperation, but recognizing this important conceptual context of independence in the protection of the Constitution and the people of the country. So I don't see a challenge to the matter that you have raised.
Okay, I'll go back to the...
Neither have I suggested that the principle of independence be flouted.
Okay, I'll go back to the other issue which affects the criminal justice system, which you are very familiar with, which Mr. Jacob is also very familiar with. On average, a trial for murder, once someone is committed to murder, takes beyond 10 years. Correct? The conditions in prison are far from what we call comfortable. And what you're proposing is to lock up persons accused of serious crimes without bail for an extended period as a solution or a temporary solution to reduce the amount of offenders or accused offenders on the streets, and you will have a temporary solution to crime? Or would that be something that you think that will give a greater sense of security to the country?
No, I didn't. I simply said the statistics bear out the fact that there are repeat offenders. There are persons who get out, well, the commissioner didn't call name, but we can come out of jail and go on a killing spree as they come out. In fact, they call in shots from inside the jail. Those are realities. And persons like that don't deserve a place among civilized people in a society. And bail is what confines that. And we do have a Bail Act. And we do have Act number 17 of 2019. All I'm saying is that it should apply. And all I'm saying is it now applies. And all I'm saying is that we are going to Parliament to have it extended, to manage persons like that. A person who would be convicted of one of the serious offenses I listed and will have no compunction tomorrow to come with a gun and repeat 6 more of those. Why shouldn't he be restrained? Why shouldn't his liberty not be restrained? In fact, in one of the cases I mentioned here this morning, I think it is there's a case, well, they kill in the jail too, you know. I think, kill in the jail. One prisoner kill the next. I remember back in 1994, a fellow killed a prison officer in a bid to escape. And only last week I read of a report, an old a situation that happened years ago, where a prisoner slashed a prison officer's throat. Fortunately, the officer lived.
Right, so
and then, you may not know, but I have information that a woman might be raped. She wants to go to the police. Criminal tell her, well, if you go, you're dead. Abandon your house. Should such a person be allowed to roam free and be a danger to you? That is all I'm saying. The law exists within the Constitution and the law, and it should be applied. It is about to expire, and we simply would like it to be extended.
All right, Minister.
And I also told you before you go that a number of administrative and other legal things and resource things and strategic things are being done to deal with the crime situation in the country, including conscious efforts on the part of the judiciary. And look at another example. We met recently with a team from the judiciary led by the Chief Justice to discuss how we must collaborate to improve the efficiency of the criminal justice system. So I don't want you in your journalistic way to say it's only the Bail Act we're depending on. I told you in great detail all the other things that are being done, as I asked just to extend that law so that it will continue for the reasons I've stated. Yes, sir.
Okay, so given the partisan politics in the country, you're a politician, you are fully aware that the opposition will not support any amendment, any extension of the Bail Act. They have said so publicly numerous times. So is this to name and shame the opposition prior to bringing the legislation back to the House?
I will speak to the opposition in the place where we are paid and sworn to speak. That is the Parliament. When we go there, I'll speak to them there. We will speak to them there. For the time being, I'm not speaking to them. I'm speaking to you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I want you to know what you are up against. I want you to know what is expected of the police service and law enforcement. And I want you to know that they say they need certain resources. And then you can use your voice to speak to your parliamentarians to see whether you can wind some sense into them. But for the time being, I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
This is a question to the Acting Commissioner. There's been a criticism of your suggestions for legislation to the amendment to the Gang Act, the Bail Act, the extension of it. The opposition has been saying that you should stick to policing and leave legislation for the legislature. Is that something that you would respond to?
Yes, I will respond to that in the context that I am the Acting Commissioner of Police. And policing in itself doesn't just fall alone in a corner. You know, it is a part of the criminal justice system, as you are aware. And coming from it, it just have the basic rules that exist in the criminal justice system and in criminology, that what we are looking at is basic deterrence. Right? There is, in fact, general deterrence and specific deterrence. And if we have a Bail Act in itself that is designed that when persons looking that if they carry out certain acts, they will be unable to get bail, it will act as a deterrent to those individuals. And if persons see that particular persons, when they commit these acts, they are not getting bail at all, it may act as a deterrent to prevent them from getting involved in activities. Those are some basic principles in criminology, and that is what we are dealing with. And I explained earlier that even with the Bail Act existing, what have been happening is that some of the offenders choose to plead guilty because it is acting as a deterrent in the context of that they don't want to stay within there for that period of time. And I made the plea that the information that we give to the members of the judiciary is in the context of what trends and patterns that we are seeing that they may not see, because you have several courts throughout Trinidad and Tobago, and they may not know that this is the outcome of what we are seeing from our data. So I put it out them to let them know that this is what we are seeing, so they can take it in consideration if they want. So to say that the Commissioner of Police should not speak in relation to those things is really, I will put it in simple terms, retarded. The Commissioner of Police have the right to comment on such issues, and I will continue doing so.
Okay, Commissioner, once again, recently you said that the issue of gangs receiving contracts from the state remains a live issue, and there is in the public domain a multiplicity of investigations against a sitting government minister who has been accused of several serious offences, none of which have been completed as yet. And these things ought to be wrapped up quickly, whether there's truth in it or whether there's fact in it, to assist in showing the youth or the public that the police are serious about dealing with crime wherever it is. Can you give an update on the what your intelligence is saying in relation to gangs getting contracts from the state, and what is the status of the various investigations against this government minister, whom I will not name.
The last time I spoke on that, I said what we are seeing is that gangs are getting involved in a lot of other activities, from illegal quarrying to even the question of home invasion and the question of fight for territory, which was linked to government contracts, has reduced tremendously. That is the last time when I spoke. The question of some, with the latter part that you spoke about, I will not comment on it at all, because we have several investigations existing, which we call status crime, covering white-collared investigation, right, with several persons within the society. And I again mentioned to the public that these matters tend to take a longer period to be complete, because it depends on a lot of documentation from other institutions, production orders, and a lot of work need to be done by our anti-corruption bureau in order to get the work done. And then we go by the DPP, and we are provided with other advice and instructions of work to do. So the white-collared crime investigation tend to take a longer period than the conventional street crime investigation, right? So I will continue repeating it until it is registered, and the questions pertaining to that may be reduced.
And I would like to add, as a government minister in the cabinet myself, I give you the assurance that any time, as has happened before in a particular case, in this government, any time it gets to the point where the Prime Minister is satisfied, based on information from the police or perhaps even otherwise, that a situation is sufficiently serious and not just rumor talk and scandal and rumor mongering, as is so commonplace in Trinidad and Tobago, and the speculation. You see, like how just now you say accused, that's a strong word, because anybody could say anything, you know. But I give you the assurance, anytime the Prime Minister of the Republic finds, as has happened before, that there is sufficient material to take talk seriously, he will act. So from the standpoint of this government, Mr. Bahor, it ain't going to be that we know that there is some serious criminality taking place among one of our colleagues and no action will be taken. That would not be so. So the fact that no action has been taken so far suggests that the Prime Minister and the government ain't reached to that point as yet. You may have reached there, others may, but we haven't reached to that yet, and we're relying on the process. The police largely, and the process. You follow me? So the fact that the minister who you're talking about, whoever he or she be, still in the cabinet, means that the government is not yet at the point where any other action is necessary. But the minute we get to that point, if that ever happens, unlike other people, action will be taken. I am confident about that, if I know my Prime Minister as well as I do.
And my final question,
yes,
Mr. Jacob. It has been some weeks now since the incident outside Queen's Park, Savannah, where a young man was repeatedly kicked in his head by police officers, shown on social media. It even prompted the Prime Minister to ask the Minister of National Security for a status report while he's recuperating in California. What is the status of that investigation? Is this one that will take a longer period of time to be determined, or is this a simple matter in your eyes?
That matter, again, is under investigation by the Professional Standards Bureau and our Complaints Division. I wish to rebut what you said about the repeated kick in the head. From our information, that the person was struck in some instances on the shoulder. The medical is there. So I will not want to endorse that to say, when you use the word repeatedly, I mean to say, I don't know why we want to accelerate things in, and put things in that context. But the matter is under investigation at this point in time by our Professional Standards Bureau.
Thank you. Any other question?
Hi, good day. Charlene Rambasad from Guardian Media. As we spoke about the allegations against the minister, when that document would have first been leaked, you, Mr. Hinds, would have spoken on the promenade and said that the leak was very easy to trace. Mr. Jacobs, can you tell us whether you all have been successful in tracing where that leak came from?
Well, since I answered it then, let me answer it now. Because I spoke about the document. What I did say is that these intelligence reports are coded. Yeah? And as a consequence of the coding, one will know from where it came and to whom it was given. And on that occasion, I did say, and I maintain, it was given to a particular officer of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. I maintain that.
So I'm asking, has it been, can you all name that officer?
Can I name that officer? Could you? Should you? At this stage? Do you have any other question, my lady? Could you believe that?
Good afternoon. Elizabeth Gonzalez from Newsday.
Yes, my lady.
On the topic of body cams, Commissioner, you said that the process has slowed down because of technical apparatus issues. Could you give us a timeline as to when the unit would be up and when these body cams would come into operation?
The body cams are in fact in operation, but as we distributed throughout Trinidad and Tobago, there are some places that we did not have the ICT infrastructure in place, and that is being worked on with our IT department. We expect that by the end of August, all the body cams that were purchased will be distributed among the frontline officers.
Okay, and the unit?
All right.
The unit.
When I said the unit, we talk, in order to distribute it, you need to have the IT infrastructures in place. So basically, it will be in place by the end of August, so therefore we can have the full distribution, and that is commensurate with training of the officers and with the use of the body cams.
Okay. Minister, could you give me your comments, feelings on the murders that happened over the weekend?
Well, one of the reasons why I'm here this morning is because of my pain and my own trauma and my own distress about the levels of murders and crime generally in Trinidad and Tobago. And the world, I follow the world situation as well. I look at what is happening in other countries. And it is very distressing. So that's how I feel, very distressed. But I know distress is not enough. Something has to be done. So I look to the police service. I look to the defense force, who are responsible for our border security, to keep the weapons of war and destruction from coming in here. I look to the police so that they could take action to make sure that even when the thing comes legally, it is not abused or misused and cause further crime in the country. So I'm very, to answer your question about my feelings, very distressed, very displeased about it. But I understand all too well it is the way of the human being. We want to resolve disputes with violence, greed, hate, egos, and the prevalence of these firearms, which is why, as a matter of government policy, we directed the police service, and it has begun to embark upon a national gun retrieval exercise. And the police are engaged in that. When Mr. Arawi spoke in 2019, the number of firearms he's talking about, they joke to what now exists, as I said earlier. And therefore, it is my hope that providing the police and law enforcement with all of the resources they need, two things will happen. We will secure our borders as best as this island nation can do, using all the available technologies, and at the same time the police service in its national gun retrieval exercise mopping up all these illegal firearms from around the place, because they, Mr. Jacob tells me, contribute to 87% of the murders of which we speak. So it's distressing, but that's not enough. Things have to be done. We revealed some of those things this morning. Thank you.
And as Darren would have mentioned, suggestions made by the Commissioner, in an interview with Newsday on Tuesday, the Commissioner also made some suggestions on ways to strengthen the anti-gang legislation to better tackle gangsters. Some of these suggestions are denial of bail for 120 days for persons over 18 for offences under the Act, amendment of the first schedule to include fraud offences to adequately target white-collar crimes, amendment of the first schedule to include firearms tackling offences, amendment of the first schedule to include robbery and burglary offences, amendment of the first schedule to include tax evasion, increase the initial detention period from 72 hours as opposed to 48 hours as in the 2018 Act, and also to make all offences under Section 5 indictable, so that the same way how gang leaders are, the offences against gang leaders would be the same for gang members. Can I get comments from you on that?
That's a very lengthy shopping list.
Yes, it is.
But I do understand Mr. Jacob's position. You will recall that prior to 2011, we had no anti-gang law in this country. It was first introduced in 2011. And we were in opposition then, as you will recall, and it required a supermajority, a special majority. And we gave that, we the PNM gave that to the then UNC, or People's Partnership Government. And they passed it. And we gave them a 5-year sunset clause. The reason why the sunset clause was put in is for an opportunity to review it at the end of the 5 years, because it was new at that time. Well, of course, government changed in 2015. They had it for 5 years, and you hear them say something. You heard Mr. Jacob say, you've heard other commissioners say how impactful. I can tell you, as a practicing attorney at law too, some of my clients out there, I would meet them around as MP and we will talk. And they told me they feared the anti-gang law. They don't mind getting charged for possession of a gun or for robbery, but don't charge me under the anti-gang law, because it went along with a bail amendment that restricted bail in the way that you have just described, in a serious way. So they didn't like it. They didn't want it. They didn't want to be associated with no gang case for the reasons I've stated. So when the government changed in 2015, we now, the law having a 5-year sunset starting in 2011, in 2016 when we are in government, it expired. We made the mistake and go back to the parliament to get them to extend it. And you know the story. They refused. And as well, the bail amendment that went with it fell down as well. And so, I understand Mr. Jacob's shopping list, but we are where we are. And you might better direct those questions to the opposition, because we supported it, and we have made it very clear we will support it. But for those who are politically minded in this country, like me, and some of you, there'll be all kind of political discussions around it, but the bottom line is, we did not get the support. And you heard Mr. Bahor say he has heard as a citizen. They have proclaimed in advance, before considering it to see if it has value or not. In advance, they say we're not supporting that. Now, that is the essence of recklessness and uncaring as far as I am concerned. But for some people, that's not an issue. For some people, principle and integrity is not an issue. Business as usual. But so it is.
Okay. Commissioner, I have one last question. This question is for you. Could you say if there are challenges in bringing common offenses such as murder, robbery, rape against people who are gang members or leaders in the absence of the Anti-Gang Act? Why is it difficult? Are there challenges with forensic? I'm asking this because the number of people charged under the Anti-Gang Act remains low compared to the gangs that we know that are out there.
Well, before Mr. Jacob answers, let me say we do have anti-gang law, but because of the problem, you see, when we creating law, he'll answer. When we creating law, not only we have to take the criminals into account, we also have to take the opposition into account. It's a very difficult position. Imagine that. When we shaping law to protect you, we have to study the criminal, but we also have to study the opposition who has said what Mr. Bauer said they have said. It's a very difficult thing. And you wonder where they really stand in this society. So we eventually passed an anti-gang law, watered down, as I said, taking out the need for their support. So we do have an anti-gang law, but the anti-gang law had its own inherent issues, and Mr. Jacob could speak to that.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much for the question. It's a good opportunity to let the nation know that from 2015 to this time, 80 persons were actually charged under the anti-gang legislation. Now, if you divide that with the number of years, you will see probably it's around 15 persons per year. So if the question is asked about how many persons are charged for the year so far, and it is asked in the month of February, and you hear 2, you know, you cannot go and hold on to that and say, well, look, nothing is happening. You really need to look and see what happened in the years going by. The struggle with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is that if an offense is committed and we are trying to put together the evidence to charge the person for the substantive offense, and also it will fall under the gang legislation, if we fail to reach that threshold, that person will still be charged under the normal legislation. So to say that we have a lot of gang members who we know are involved in gangs, but we charge them for offenses and we may not reach that threshold because of some of the challenges, but they will still be charged and placed before the court. But if they are charged under the gang legislation, it will be more forceful in relation to bail and penalties. But the key is that the police service able to develop the mechanism that we can just charge somebody purely for being a gang member or a leader of a gang. And that is the direction that we are going. You'll realize that the recent charges that we had with persons with human trafficking, within the past 6 months, we have charged the person for being a gang member and being members of gangs, right? But it was directly linked to particular offenses and not just the pure being a gang leader or a member of a gang. So it is working for us. It is helping us significantly. But if this Bail Act is not continued, it will also weaken the Anti-Gang Act. And that is the reason why we are crying out to say we need this to continue, because the Anti-Gang Act is already a bit weakened, and by going in the direction of not supporting that Bail Act, it will again weaken the anti-gang legislation.
Mr. Jacob, you are a man of the people. You have been on the ground. You feel the pulse of the nation. You are aware that unemployment is going up. The cost of living is going up. People are becoming desperate to put food on the table for their families. Do you see that people who are not like-minded to commit crime may soon turn to that option based on the circumstances, the economic conditions in the country, and can cause a spiral of crime from new criminals?
You see, again, we make a lot of assumptions, and in Trinidad and Tobago, persons have choices, and I don't want to go into that direction in relation to the relevant providing of jobs and all of that. That is not for me. But all I can say, there are several opportunities in Trinidad and Tobago, And there's a lot of work being done by the police service and through our community policing, linking with the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, linking with the Ministry of Youth, right, and National Service. We are doing a lot of work with them so that we can go into the communities and get things done and identify to the young people all the available opportunities that are being provided. And we are working with them in order to go into communities and do that work. And that is the way I will answer you, because there are in fact opportunities, but when we go out in the communities, we recognize that a lot of the young persons and even some of the adults are not aware of it. Even though we may have advertisements on the papers and whether it's in the social media, so we need to go on the ground and help in order to prevent exactly what you are saying there. There are opportunities, and we'll want the young persons to take these opportunities because they are the people that we have identified being persons who are coming to be offenders and committing crime. So we are targeting them directly, and I want to thank all the ministers, from the Minister of Sports, Social Development, all of them have come together with us in order to do work in the various communities.
You know, just let me say this very quickly, as you know, representing people as well as I do. As a student of criminology myself, I don't know. I am aware that there are different schools of thought, whether poverty and social conditions influence human beings towards crime, and I've heard all of that, and I'm familiar with all of the theory around it, most of it at any rate. But I know, as a fact, I can tell you, I know some particularly poor people who are so dignified and so honest, they ain't committing no crime. And then I know some very wealthy people for whom money doesn't matter, and there's the biggest thief in town, and criminals. So there's a whole lot of complexity around this. You follow? So I can only say we acknowledge that the world is a difficult place, especially in this time. Countries all over around the world would have just come out of COVID, the Ukraine war affecting wheat production and prices going up and food insecurity around the world. And the government of Trinidad and Tobago has been responding. COVID-19, we responded during those 2.5 years to the needs of the people in light of the circumstances, to the tune of millions, billions of your taxpayers' monies, as opposed to stealing it. And I can tell you, as a member of parliament, we reached out to people at all levels, businesses, individuals, credit union members, you just name it, individuals, households. We did that. And of course, in response to what is happening now, the government, like governments all over the world, recognize that there are some difficulties. We are riding it out, making things available, making opportunities available. Only yesterday I got a report. Over 2,000 youngsters, maybe closer to 3,000, made themselves available at Napa, I think it was, and at the Queen's Park Savannah to become members of the Defense Force. There are opportunities, and many of them would be recruited. All of the positions in national security, all of the young nurses, all of the young teachers are young people, so there are opportunities aplenty for young people, and particularly in a world of digital technology. It is endless. There are possibilities all around. I know young people who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars using the technology, doing business, advertising, doing stuff, designing stuff. So there are opportunities for young people, and I am not persuaded that because things are hard in the world and in the country as you described it today, that is a pass for going to rape somebody or kidnap somebody or rob somebody. I don't easily subscribe to that. Though I'm not a sociologist, so I can't say with perfection what may or may not be the cause. But as I close to tell you, I've seen very poor people who have maintained the highest standards of honesty and dignity and ain't robbing nobody. And on the other hand, I've seen many for whom money is not an issue, but they are criminals nonetheless. So I am perplexed.
Commissioner Jacob, yes. Angelo Marcel from Newsday here. Here's the scenario, right? A man is accused of molesting children over 15 years due to his access to a preschool. Victims are interviewed with their parents. They've made statements. They've gone through the process of getting DNA swabs. They've gone through the counseling system. Why would the accused not be interviewed after so many people have come forward?
I don't know what investigations you are talking about. I don't know if it is real or unreal.
It's real.
Right? However, you can pass on the necessary information for me after the press brief so I can check on it if it is something existing within the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. So I will be able to answer you in the appropriate manner.
Good luck, folks. I thank you all very much. I thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, officials at National Security, and thank you all for coming. And we do look forward to your promulgating the elements of this press briefing for the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago in your usual professional and dignified manner. Thank you very much. Mr. J.
This is TTT. Live for local.